When people finally realize what they are worth, there's bound to be some kind of pushback from powers bigger that use the benefit from them. For Pickle this pushback was far more dangerous than she expected. Hidden in the deep, shadowy swamplands of Louisiana, Pickle had mistakenly uncovered secrets deeper than alligator nests. For Pickle this wasn't just a discovery. The water had finally risen too high to ignore, and she needed to act fast. Join us in this video as we take you through the dangerous discoveries of Pickle and her demands for better. The dangerous discovery began with a call that came at 3 a.m. that morning, jolting Pickle out of bed, her phone glowing harshly in the darkness. She didn't recognize the number, but something in her gut told her she had to answer. The voice on the other end was shaky, urgent, and somehow familiar in a way that sent a chill straight through her. By dawn, she stood at the edge of the bayou, staring into water that seemed darker than usual. The air was thick with humidity, and something else, something she couldn't quite name, fear maybe, or the weight of too many unspoken truths finally demanding to be heard. For months, Pickle had felt it building. The tension, the sideways looks, conversations that stopped cold the moment she walked into the room. She tried to brush it off, tell herself it was just the usual drama that comes with reality TV. After all, the Swamp People crew had always been close, bound by tradition, blood, and the unspoken understanding that life in the Louisiana wetlands follows its own rules. But this was different. During the last few filming sessions, the production team had been off. There were unexplained delays, sudden absences, a heaviness that hung over the set like fog rolling in from a marsh. Pickle noticed how certain cast members avoided eye contact, how the silence felt louder than any argument ever could. Something was wrong, and deep down, she knew it. She noticed how conversations shifted the moment money or future seasons came up. Voices lowered. Eyes darted away. The energy in the room changed. She tried to talk to her family about it, but they brushed her off with the same reassurances they'd been repeating for weeks. Everything was fine. She was overthinking it. The show was as strong as ever. Pickle knew better. That phone call had confirmed what she'd been afraid to admit. Someone she trusted, someone who had been there from the very beginning, had finally broken their silence. What they told her in those desperate, early morning hours changed everything. She turned away from the water, her jaw set with quiet determination. Pickle had spent her entire life facing dangers most people only encountered in nightmares: alligators, water moccasins, sudden storms that could flip a boat in seconds. But this threat was different. This one wore a familiar face. It hid behind contract and handshakes, behind polished smiles, and carefully crafted public personas. The sun climbed higher, spilling gold and amber across the swamp. On any other morning, it would have been breathtaking, but Pickle's mind was racing, running through implications, worst-case scenarios, and the chilling realization that her family's legacy might be at risk. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was happening behind the scenes of Swamp People, whatever dangerous truth had been growing in the shadows, it was time to drag it into the light, even if it cost her everything. Did she get to the root of this? What was it? Keep watching to find out. Truth, lies, and betrayal unfolded as the History Channel offices in New York felt like another planet compared to the Louisiana wetlands Pickle called home. She'd been there twice before, both times for promotional appearances that felt more like performances than real conversations. Smile for the cameras, tell the hunting stories, play the role everyone expected. But this time was different. In the week after that 3 a.m. phone call, Pickle had started doing something she'd never done before. Digging, not in the thick mud of the swamp, but through documents, contracts, and financial records, each one revealing a picture far more disturbing than she'd ever imagined. What Pickle uncovered made her stomach turn. The caller had been Marcus, a production assistant who'd worked on Swamp People since season 3. Over the years, they'd grown close, bonding during late-night filming breaks, sharing quiet conversations, and a mutual belief in telling real, honest stories. Marcus had always felt like one of the good ones, someone who cared about the cast as people, not just characters on camera. When he called, his voice was heavy with guilt. "I can't do this anymore, Pickle," he'd said. "I can't watch them do this to you all and stay quiet." At first, she thought it was about money, but it went deeper than that. They wanted him to fake footage. Marcus confessed they'd asked him to splice together scenes that never happened, to make it look like someone was doing something dangerous, reckless, even illegal. He told them no, so they found someone else who would say yes. That's when I knew it had gone too far. Pickle listened in growing horror as Marcus laid out the full scope of what was happening. The show that was meant to honor their way of life, to bring respect and recognition to swamp culture, had become something else entirely. A machine, one that chewed up authenticity and spat out manufactured drama for viewers to consume. She asked him why he was telling her now. Why did he wait so long? His answer was simple and devastating. They're planning something big for next season, something that's going to change the show completely. And if you don't stop it now, there won't be anything left worth saving. That conversation changed everything. It was the moment everything began to move. Pickle reached out to the other cast members slowly, carefully, testing the waters to see who else hadn't noticed a shift. What she found wasn't just suspicion. It was a quiet network of people who had all felt the same unease but had been too isolated, too afraid, or too uncertain to speak up on their own. Who exactly felt the rising tension? And what were their responses? Keep watching to find out. The confrontation revealed there was Jean-Paul, a veteran hunter whose family had lived in the swamp for 6 generations. He admitted his concerns about environmental impact had been brushed aside by producers who only care about dramatic footage. They pressured him to hunt in protected areas, to take more gators than regulations allowed, all while the cameras rolled, selling it as authentic. Then there was Chantel. During a family emergency, her daughter had been filmed without proper consent, and that footage was later used in the season premiere, edited for maximum emotional punch. Private trauma turned into public entertainment. And Big Mike discovered his image was being used to sell merchandise he never approved and never profited from. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of the money, but because of what it meant for their community. Swamp people had brought visibility and economic opportunity to a region that desperately needed both. It had turned everyday hunters into recognizable faces, people who had spent their lives working hard in an unforgiving environment, far from the spotlight. For many families, the show had been a lifeline. Now, that lifeline felt more like a noose. Pickle understood the risk. Speaking out could end everything. The show could be canceled, livelihoods would vanish. The attention and opportunities that came with fame could disappear overnight. But staying silent meant something worse. It meant becoming complicit in a system that violated every principle she'd been raised to value: integrity, honesty, respect for the land, and for the traditions that had sustained them for generations. As Pickle prepared for meeting with the network executives, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for every cast member who had been manipulated, for every family whose story had been twisted, for the very soul of what Swamp People was meant to represent. The network's response was swift and calculated. Within 48 hours of Pickle's first outreach, she was seated in a conference room designed to intimidate. Expensive artwork lined the walls. The table was so polished that she could see her reflection staring back at her, and executives wore suits that cost more than most swamp families earned in a month. They smiled. They offered coffee. They spoke in calm, reassuring tones about misunderstandings and unfortunate miscommunications. Then the smiles hardened. "We have contracts, Miss Wheat," the lead executive said, sliding a thick document across the table. Every cast member signed willingly. "If you're suggesting there's been wrongdoing, we'd be happy to address that in court, along with your continued participation in the show, of course." How was this confrontation going to end? Would they intimidate her into submission or let her have her way? Let's see. The intimidation continued as another executive leaned in, a woman with sharp eyes and a predatory smile. "We've also been reviewing footage from recent seasons," she added smoothly. "There are interesting moments that never made it to air. Conversations about bending regulations, discussions around hunting practices that may not align with current conservation laws." She paused just long enough for the threat to land. It would be unfortunate if that material became public, especially now, with increased scrutiny from environmental groups. The message was unmistakable. They had leverage on everyone. Carefully collected insurance against exactly this kind of rebellion. Pickle felt anger surge through her, hot, sharp, uncontrollable. "So," she said, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest, You're blackmailing us with footage you manufactured and manipulated? We're just reminding you of reality, the lead executive said smoothly. Television is a business, a costly business. The production costs for Swamp People are substantial. Permits, equipment, insurance, crew salaries. We've invested millions in making you and your family household names, and every investment comes with expectations. The room fell silent. The executives exchanged glances, a wordless conversation passing between them. Years of experience, countless similar confrontations, strategies honed to perfection. We're prepared to offer a compromise, the woman with the predatory smile said at last. An increase in cast compensation for next season, more creative input on storylines, a percentage of merchandise revenue within reason. In exchange, you drop these accusations and sign an NDA regarding this conversation. It was a generous offer, more than most reality television casts had ever received. The money alone could change lives, provide security for families who had never had a safety net. But it came with a price Pickle wasn't sure she could pay. And if we refuse, she asked, voice calm but sharp. The lead executive's smile vanished. Then you're in breach of contract. We'll sue for damages. We'll release that compromising footage. And we'll make sure every network, every production company, every potential employer knows you're difficult, litigious, and unreliable. You and anyone associated with you will never work in television again. Pickle stood, her chair scraping across the floor like a challenge thrown down. I need time to discuss this with the other cast members, she said. You have 72 hours, the woman replied. After that, the offer expires, and we proceed with alternative plans. What would Picklewheat pick? Does the tide change in her favor? Keep watching to find out. The hardest part of every fight came as the flight back to Louisiana felt endless. Pickle's mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, and consequences. She'd come to New York hoping for accountability, for justice, for acknowledgement of the harm that had been done. Now, the weight of decision that could affect dozens of lives pressed down on her like the humid swamp air back home. Instead, she had walked into a masterclass in corporate intimidation. Marcus met her at the airport, his face drawn and worn with worry. How bad? He asked. Worse than we thought, Pickle admitted as they walked to his truck. They're not denying anything. They're just making it clear that fighting them will cost more than anyone could afford to pay. The drive back to the bayou felt like traveling between worlds. The closer they got to home, the more the glittering towers of commerce and entertainment felt like a fever dream. Out here, life ran on different principles. You respected the land. You honored your word. You took care of your community. Over the next 3 days, Pickle convened meetings with every cast member she trusted. They gathered where cameras couldn't reach. Living rooms, boat docks, hushed conversations about futures that suddenly fell uncertain. The reactions varied. Some were ready to fight, consequences be damned. Others were terrified of losing everything they'd built. Families had made major purchases based on projected show income. College tuition was being paid, medical bills covered. The show was woven into the fabric of their lives in ways that made extracting from it nearly impossible without causing damage. Maybe we should take the deal, Jean Paul said during one particularly tense gathering. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we have now. It keeps the show going, keeps people employed. It also keeps us complicit, Pickle countered. Every manufactured storyline, every exploited moment, every time they ask us to compromise our principles for ratings, we'll know we had a chance to stop it, and we chose money instead. The room fell silent, the weight of that truth pressing down on everyone present. Chantel spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. My grandmother used to say that some things are more valuable than comfort, Chantel said softly. Integrity can't be repurchased once you've sold it. I think she'd be disappointed if she knew we chose the easy path. Others nodded slowly, hearing their own values reflected in her words. Lessons passed down through generations of swamp dwellers. People would survive by holding onto their principles, even when the world tried to break them. As the 72-hour deadline loomed, Pickle found herself back at the edge of the bayou, staring into water that had witnessed generations of her family's history. This land had shaped them. It had taught them resilience, adaptability, but also the subtle art of knowing when to fight and when a strategic retreat was wiser. The confrontation, the choice, came not from Pickle, but from an unexpected source. What was going to be their final decision? Were they going to fight for their integrity, or let this fight be a lost one? Keep watching to find out. The resistance began on the morning of the deadline. Before she'd finalized a response to the network, a lawyer appeared at her door. Not one of the network's attack dogs, but someone different, older, with kind eyes and a briefcase worn from years of use. "My name is Catherine Brossard," the woman said. "I represent the Louisiana Cultural Heritage Foundation. We've been following your situation with great interest." Over coffee at Pickle's kitchen table, Catherine laid out an option no one had considered. The foundation had been looking for a test case, an opportunity to challenge how reality television exploited regional cultures and traditional ways of life. They had resources, legal expertise, and most importantly, a willingness to fight without putting the financial burden on the cast. "We can't guarantee victory," Catherine admitted. "Media companies have deep pockets and powerful allies, but we can guarantee you won't face this alone. And we can make enough noise that other shows, other networks, will think twice before trying the same tactics." It was a lifeline Pickle hadn't dared to hope for. Within hours, she had assembled the core group of cast members who had been part of the resistance from the beginning. They sat attentive as Catherine outlined the strategy: a lawsuit alleging contract fraud, cultural exploitation, and violations of Louisiana labor laws. At the same time, they would go public with their story, using the very media attention the show had generated to shine a light on what had been happening behind the scenes. "It won't be easy," Catherine warned. "They'll fight back hard. Your personal lives will be scrutinized. They'll try to discredit you, make it look like you're greedy or difficult. Are you prepared for that?" Pickle looked around the room at the faces of people who had become more than castmates over the years. Friends, family, fellow survivors of an industry that chewed up authenticity and spat out carefully edited illusions of reality. "We face gators, hurricanes, and economic collapse," she said quietly. "I think we can handle some lawyers in fancy suits." The decision was unanimous. That afternoon, Catherine held a press conference outside the Louisiana state capitol. Pickle stood beside her, flanked by a dozen other Swamp People cast members, as Catherine read a prepared statement detailing the allegations against the network and production company. The response was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the story was trending on social media. News outlets picked it up, framing it as David versus Goliath, authentic culture versus corporate exploitation. Other reality television cast members began coming forward with similar stories, creating a wave of revelations that threatened to engulf the entire industry. The network's PR team went into overdrive, releasing statements affirming their commitment to valuing cast members and ensuring fair practices. But the momentum had shifted. The swamp had risen, and there was no turning it back. Behind the scenes, according to Marcus, who still had friends in the production office, panic was spreading. Sponsors were nervous. Advertisers were asking questions. The carefully curated image of Swamp People as authentic documentary television was starting to crumble. But the real confrontation was yet to come. When was it going to come? And what was it coming with? Stay strapped in and keep watching as we find out. How Pickle Wheat won the fight unfolded 3 days after the press conference. The lead executive who had threatened Pickle in New York arrived in Louisiana. Not in a polished conference room this time, but at the small restaurant in Pierre Park where cast members often gathered. He walked like a man entering enemy territory, his suit and expensive watch marking him as an outsider among people who measured wealth in a different currency: land, skill, and legacy. "We need to talk," he said, approaching the table where Pickle sat with Jean-Paul, Chantel, and Big Mike. "I think you said everything that needed to be said in New York," Pickle replied coolly. "Things have changed." He pulled up a chair without asking, a power move that might have worked in a Manhattan boardroom. Here, it just made him look desperate. "The network is willing to renegotiate, substantially," he said, his voice trying to mask tension. "Here's our counteroffer," Pickle said, when he finally ran out of tactics. "Full financial disclosure going back to Season 1. Fair compensation moving forward determined by an independent audit. Complete creative consultation on storylines, and immediate termination of any producer or executive found to have manufactured footage or coerced cast members into violating regulations or ethics." The executive's face cycled through several shades, red, pale, then a grayish defeat. I don't have the authority to agree to those terms, he muttered. Then find someone who does, Jean-Paul said, his voice carrying the weight and authority of a man who had never been impressed by corporate titles. Because we're not backing down. Not this time. I don't have the authority to agree to those terms, the executive stammered. Then you'll destroy the show, he added.